Hi, I'm Brian Walsh with the Wisconsin Center for Technology Commercialization, CTC. I'm talking with Ben Schrag, Senior Program Director for the SBIR, STTR programs at the National Science Foundation. In today's quick chat, we're focusing on best practices for NSF SBIR, STTR Phase 2 commercialization plans. So to help us get started, Ben, can you give us a little background about yourself and your current role?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity and thanks for having me. Yeah, so I've been at the National Science Foundation for 11 years. We have a dedicated team of program directors to handle the SBIR and STTR programs, typically around 10 of us when we're fully staffed, so I'm one of those 10. I also have a role as the policy liaison for the program, and so I spend a fair amount of my time working with other government agencies, working with other institutions to just kind of to partner with them and to be the representative to work things through with them. So I've been typically handling the materials and the instrumentation portfolio within the program. And again, I think my 11-year anniversary at NSF is next week. Prior to coming, thanks. I haven't made it yet, so hold your thoughts. The thing I did before I came to NSF actually was I was on the other side of the program. I was working at a startup, and I was a phase 1 and phase 2 PI for SBIR awards from the NSF. So I've had experience applying for and working on these awards as an entrepreneur as well. My technical background is all in physics, but I basically went straight from grad school to my startup. So so that's my experience.
Great. So, yeah, so it's good to hear you have both sides of the equation. So in a recent conversation, you mentioned that applicants should think of the SBIR program more as an investor than a government organization. What do you mean by that?
I think so. I think the point there was that most folks, when they come to us for the first time, the relevant kind of proxy they have, the closest comparison they have for our program is other government R&D funding programs, so other SBIR agencies or other basic research programs. And the reason I say that is because I think in terms of understanding the things we're looking for and the perspective we have as we make our decisions, the private sector investor is actually a pretty close proxy on a lot of things that we do. So we're kind of a mix of, you know, what I think people are familiar with, which is like government research funding agencies. So a lot of technical interest, technical expertise, focusing on, you know, research and development. And we mix that with the private sector experience. Specifically, we're funding really mostly startup companies. And so the things that, you know, startup companies typically would do in a private sector investor is they would really focus on the market opportunity, customer traction, and the team. And those are things that are really quite important to us in the small business programs at NSF. So obviously we're not an investor in the sense that we don't take an equity stake, we don't have a board seat, we don't exert control over the business in a way, but we look at these awards that we make as commercial opportunities, and the impacts we're looking for really are only realized when the company we're funding is commercially successful. And so because of that, we take a very commercial perspective towards making decisions.
Okay, great, thanks. So generally speaking, who are the reviewers and what are they looking for when they review these?
So I mentioned we're kind of a hybrid, and so there's really two big things that we care about a lot as we make decisions, and the reviewers kind of mirror those two criteria, right? So one criteria is what we call intellectual merit. The better way to think about it is technical innovation. We're looking for disruptive, risky, high impact technology, gee whiz, new science, new engineering innovations that is going to create, if it is proven in the lab, 10 times better products, right? So think laser eye surgery. In that sense, we're looking to people to understand the science and the research that the company is looking to do. We're looking to understand how it's differentiated and how it's innovative. And the people who are brought in as reviewers to give us advice on that are scientists and engineers, typically people who have technical expertise, either in the scientific area where the relevant company is working, or sometimes in the domain, in the market where they're trying to launch the technology, or both. So the technical reviewers tend to be again, kind of subject matter experts on science and technology. the other big thing we look for is commercial impact. And in that sense, again, we're pretty close to, what an early stage, say an angel investor might look for. And so the kinds of people we bring in for those commercial reviewer roles are entrepreneurs, investors in the public and private sector, people who've taken technology to market, right? So not just people who understand startups, but people who understand startups that are based on deep technology, that are based on new science and engineering innovations. The people who have done that, who have participated and understand that, are brought in to give us advice on that front. So it's really a mix of traditional kind of science engineers and also people who know deep technology startups.
Okay. Can you specifically maybe break down the commercialization plan and maybe give the audience some words of advice on key sections?
Yeah, so it's important to know that we do have a full commercialization plan that's part of the phase 2 application. In phase 1, we asked some questions around the commercial side of things, but I wouldn't say we're asking for a full commercialization plan, right? So I can talk about this phases maybe just briefly separately. As I mentioned, our companies that we fund are mostly startups. So about 80% of the companies we fund are less than 3 years old at phase 1. And so they don't really necessarily have a full validated business model and a commercialization plan. So we're looking for certain commercial aspects in phase 1, but not really a full plan, right? So things like how do you go to market? What's your pricing strategy? What are your channels? Those things are not things we look at very much in phase 1 because they're still unknown a lot of times. What we're really looking for in phase 1 are the kind of key early pieces of a business opportunity. And those are the main things that we're looking for are to understand who the customer is going to be, who we think the customer is, to get really inside their heads and to really understand what important problem this technology, this product could solve for those customers, right? So the phase 1 is less about a go-to-market strategy, taking you from point A to point B, and more about showing us that there is a point B somewhere that they think eventually will be something they can build a plan to go and harness. So really customer value proposition and competitive advantage are the big ones in phase 1. In phase 2, we have more of a traditional business plan where we're going to bring in, financing and channels and partnership and, sales and marketing and those sorts of things. And I think phase 2, the commercialization plan looks more similar to, what you would see in kind of a traditional early stage pitch. And I think a lot of agencies have similar things.
So in thinking about phase 2 commercialization plan, are there sections that applicants typically fall short on? Are there certain aspects of it that applicants find the most difficult or where there are shortcomings?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's definitely some common places we see a lot of problems. I think, many of those problems, I mean, a lot of times they end up somewhere in the neighborhood of not understanding the customer, not understanding the competition well enough. Those are the main things that we're looking for, right? So there's different aspects of the commercialization plans have different penalties if you don't really get them well enough, right? So if you, for example, don't have the right pricing strategy, that's a problem for a company, but that's something you can fix. If fundamentally you haven't shown that there's actually a customer who cares about what you're building, that's a fatal flaw for your company. That's how most companies fail in our portfolio. And so the biggest, most important weaknesses are not understanding customers, not really convincing us that there's really something that you're building that they're going to need, or not understanding competition or basically kind of the landscape into which you're going to try to compete. But I think as a general rule, those things I just mentioned and many of the big weaknesses we see are a result of the company just fundamentally not spending enough time engaging with their ecosystem and their stakeholders and understanding how they think and what their needs are. And so at the end of the day, most of the commercialization weaknesses we see are simply a result of lack of spending time in doing your homework into the market.
There seems to be an intimidation around the financial projections and the revenue model component. How in depth are you looking for people to be there?
So we ask for a lot of depth on those things, not because necessarily the answers themselves are per se critical to our decision, but because we're trying to get inside the head of the team and the entrepreneurs, right? One of the challenges with being a government agency where you ask for people to apply based on a document, but you're looking at things like more like an investor, is that a document doesn't necessarily serve some of the things you want to understand very well, right? The document is great for talking about science. It's great for some of the aspects of the competitive landscape and stuff. It's not a great way to evaluate a team. And as you know, investors in the private sector don't use documents to evaluate teams. They do it in personal, maybe not personal, but maybe over Zoom now, but they do it face to face. And so, we have the document and we need to figure out ways where we can kind of get inside the head of the entrepreneur when you don't have that face-to-face interaction. And one of the real ways we look at the finances is to use it as a way to just get inside how these folks are thinking about how the company is going to play out, right? So the answers to the financial questions are important mostly because they give us insight into the team, to be honest. So we're looking for a lot of detail there. And the most important thing, a piece of advice I would give to these folks is that however they answer the questions around finances, they need to make sure they provide a window into their thinking so that we can get inside their head, because the financials will change. And the only thing that is not going to change about most of these teams is two things. The technology usually is not going to change. It is what it is. The team is usually going to be, it may evolve, but the key decision makers will usually stay the same. And so we want to really understand those decision makers, because, if they need to change their 5-year financial projections, we need to make sure we trust them to make those changes and to be able to assimilate the information, get the advice and help that they need.
How is lean startup methodology viewed on the proposals? Does presenting evidence of customer discovery help strengthen them?
Yeah, I mean, this is really we're almost like we've almost a self-parody with how much we focus on emphasizing the principles of lean startups at this point. The NSF Innovation Core, which many of your constituents may know about, the I-Core program, was created by an SBIR program director in our program, one of my colleagues, and it was created to solve a problem that we found in our SBIR awardees, which is that they were building great technology that nobody wanted. And so I-Core was created to help some of the teams that would eventually become SBIR proposals to try to solve that issue about lack of market understanding. And so we provide I-Core to, obviously lots of pre-venture teams through our academic program, but we also provide a version of the I-Core to all of our SBIR Phase 1 awardees, a condensed version. And we're now starting to offer the full I-Core program to our SBIR awardees as well as a pilot. So there's almost no case where lean startup methods don't help you to be a good fit for our program.
And do you encourage in the proposal for people to overtly mention their customer discovery interviews and that type of thing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be our program. It doesn't have to be an I-Core program, but whatever method that the company is going to use to be disciplined about continuing to get customer engagement and feedback as early as possible should be focused on, right? And, for some folks, we want you to go through I-Core, not just because you're checking a box for us, but because we really do think it builds a stronger company, right? So I think it's really less about having to say, okay, here's the program I went through, and more about trying to explain what you learned and how you've kind of integrated that learning into your plans.
Great. You mentioned Phase 1 and Phase 2 proposals before. Can you tell us a little bit about what are Phase 2B proposals? What are they, and what the goal of that is?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we do with our program is we have a lot of supplemental opportunities for the Phase 2 awardees. And supplemental opportunities essentially at NSF mean we're giving you an opportunity to apply for additional funding on top of your existing Phase 2 award based on certain activities or certain things you're trying to incentivize. So Phase 2B is the biggest one of those, but we have, I think, 10 or 11 supplements where you can get more money than the base award, which is currently $1 million. So some of those supplements are bringing in, we want you to help bring in students to give them an experience in a startup. We want you to to partner with community colleges to again, to have a partnership there. But the phase 2B is the biggest one we have. And the phase 2B is essentially a matching program, or at least something where you become eligible for it by bringing in validating third-party funding as a result of your phase 2 product or service, right? So if you raise a financing round, if you bring in a safe note, if you bring in sales or revenues on a contract or maybe a joint development agreement, and you can show that that money was really based on the technology that we're supporting in phase 2, you are eligible to basically ask for an extra dollar of funding through phase 2B per $2 of third-party revenue, up to $500,000 extra, right? So if you bring in $1 million or more, and you can show that it's really a direct validating, commercially validating results of whatever you're building in phase 2 for us, will give you potentially the opportunity to apply for another $500,000. And again, the idea here is that the incentivizing, that money may not be enough to keep your company going fully after our award ends, but it's a really important validation that you have a potential for a commercial opportunity. So we really want companies to start thinking about just ways to use monetization to prove out what they're doing, even during phase 2. And one of the big reasons we really look at phase 2B carefully is because we have found, as we funded companies, we know that we're not sure until maybe 5 or 10 years later whether they're really going to be successful, because these are early stage technologies that take a long time. But we have found that if a company is not able to bring in hopefully at least $1 million, even during the phase 2, of money from smart people who are really validating the potential of the commercial opportunity, it's very unlikely they'll be eventually successful. So almost all the big commercial successes we have, almost all of them got the phase 2B award because they were able to start showing to drive dollars in based on their technology during phase 2.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So one question I like to ask in these strange times is, do you have any recommendations for people who are looking specifically for COVID-19 related opportunities with NSF SBIR?
Yeah, so we do have a kind of a dedicated Dear Colleague letter, which is a way NSF announces, that we're looking for a specific thing. We have one of those specifically for SBIR phase 1, STTR phase 1 proposals that are potentially going to impact COVID. It's still the same basic criteria that we have for our phase 1, but we're now kind of going to try to process it more quickly, and we're going to try to be a little more flexible around just the new reality that we're working in, understanding that normally we're looking for technologies that are early stage and risky, and therefore will take 10 years to impact the market significantly. For COVID, if you have something that's still innovative but is going to be a little bit shorter time frame, obviously we're going to try to think about funding those sorts of things now. My advice to companies is that we're seeing a huge amount of interest in that. We've seen well over 1,000 project pitches just for COVID in the last month, which is something like 6 months worth of our entire program, to be honest, of all of our technology areas. And so it's a crowded space. There's a lot of folks trying to propose doing something for COVID. And so the advice is you need to really show what differentiates yourself from the next team of smart people who know the technology stuff. Differentiation is even more important because it's so crowded in this space. And so we've had, I don't know the numbers, but just taking an example, we've had probably at least 50 teams wanting to do, kind of integration of multiple medical sensors to do kind of a COVID maintenance using AI to predict, and so you can just see and they're all really talented teams, good technologists. But we need a way to figure out, okay, which one of those, if we're going to support them, which one of them has an innovative method that is going to be differentiated and unique. And so showing the uniqueness of your approach to COVID, showing how the hammer you're going to use to hit the nail is special and better than everyone else's hammer is really important, because the nail is unquestionable. Nobody who's proposing to try to impact COVID, no one's going to be, we're not going to push back and say, oh, we don't think that that's a really important issue. It's pretty hard to say that, but the way you're going to do it and why it's better than the next 300 people is really the critical factor. So make sure you can show us what you have that the next team can't do.
Great. So before we wrap up and go to audience questions, do you have any closing thoughts for everyone?
I guess my only closing thoughts are that, again, I think if you've never, in general, if you've never worked with our program before, but maybe you've heard things about other programs, you've worked with other agencies, I think we're more approachable than people expect, and I think the on-ramp is slightly easier than people expect, and I think we're more willing to work with new applicants than most people think. I mean, a majority of the companies we fund every year, we funded the first ever grant proposal they wrote. And so don't feel like there's some kind of steep learning curve about preparing an application that you need to master before you reach out to us. And we do have this 2 to 3 page project pitch that is open and that you have to submit anyway. That is a great way to engage. And so I would just encourage people not to hesitate to engage with us. You know, you're not locking yourself into anything, and you're not going to somehow you're not going to scare us away if you make a first impression that indicates that you're not an expert in applying for government funding. So I would just encourage people to err on the side of engaging early with us.
Okay, that's great advice. So do we have any questions from the audience? Let's take a moment to do that.
Yep, there's a lot. I'll take there's a operational, I guess, question. 2 of them. Is there an NSF-wide policy for when reviews occur, or is it up to the program officers to decide when they do reviews?
So there's no NSF-wide policy as to when reviews occur. We currently have a phase 1 program that has quarterly submission windows. And so what that means is you can submit anytime, any time of the year, you're allowed to submit a proposal. Typically, if you submit towards the end of a window, you're going to see the fastest processing. Some program directors, depending on their workload and the area that they're in, will process things continuously, and some of them will wait more until the end of a window to have a batch of proposals. And so the advice I would give would be, it's never a bad thing to submit kind of towards the last few weeks of a submission window, which is where we're at right now. Our next window closes on June 4th. But if you're ready, say at the beginning of a window, you may want to reach out to your program director and ask them whether there's an advantage and whether they're going to start the review immediately or whether they're going to wait for that batch anyway. And so therefore you would be able to spend more time perfecting the application. But in general, we have these quarterly windows. And so, obviously we move as fast as we can. And most of our reviews historically have taken, 4 to 5 months for the entire process. That timeline will be going down. Hopefully it would be down more based on not having to respond to COVID. But because of the quarterly window, the goal here is to get the process closer to like 3 months or maybe 2 months, and once we get things really straightened out. But yeah, there's no top-down mandate for that. It really is, the process and details of it are really based on the program directors and how much their workload is and what their area is. Program directors who work in an area that's more fast-moving, like software, may want to move things as they come in if they have the bandwidth, whereas other areas that are going to take 10 years anyway, like say, new diagnostics or pharmaceutical technologies, those may wait till the end of the window.
Okay. Then someone asked, how critical in a phase 2 application is it to have outside investments already secured?
Most of the phase 2 applications that we fund don't have investment yet. And so I think it's a good sign. I think, outside investment, if it's from an investor who knows what they're doing, it validates a lot of the things we care about, right? Investors, most of the time, they only get a return if the company is commercially successful, and that's what we want. And so the investor at least is validating their opinion that this company has a chance to be successful. So that's good, and it's obviously also good that the company has some money to support what they're doing. But most of our companies are pre-investment, and so I think more important than raising investment is really showing that they've done a lot of homework on their ecosystem, their commercial market, their customers, users, payers, partners, and to really show that they're putting in the legwork on the market.
Okay. Todd, I'm going to ask you to unmute so you can ask your question, and I'll give everybody else the warning. If you want to ask a question, either put it in the chat or unmute and ask your question before we end.
Yeah, so thanks. Ben, I first of all, I guess I'm going to make the assumption that you know something about our SBIR advanced program in Wisconsin.
Sure. Yeah, I've had a number of portfolio companies take advantage of that.
Yeah, great. We're very happy about this. So we hope and assume that our SBIR advance match, well, I guess SBIR advanced funds that we have can function as part of a match for the NSF Phase 2B. Is that true, or can you talk to that to see whether or not that's actually true? Because we would like it to be, but I don't really know for sure.
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely can. I think Phase 2B is a program where there's an eligibility criteria, and then there is essentially what we eventually end up funding and supporting, right? So I think the advanced program, I believe I don't know, it depends a little bit on the nature of the transaction, but the last time I saw an award from Advance, I believe it did qualify. I think the thing to understand about the Phase 2B program is that there's more companies in our portfolio raising money than we have the ability to support Phase 2Bs. Our portfolio of companies, we put in about $200 million a year through our budget, through all of our awards combined. Our portfolio raises about $2 billion of outside funding every year. And so it's a huge amount of funding. And when we look at trying to figure out which Phase 2B to support, we really look at the investment carefully to understand how validating it is, right? How much does the commitment of funds by the third party validate the things that we care about, which is the market potential, the commercial opportunity. So for example, product sales are about as strong a validation of product need as you can get. Somebody's buying the product, that's the most direct way to validate the need in the market. So I think if we saw a company with sales versus a company with something else, the sales would be a little bit stronger. So it does qualify, but it is something where you have to understand that we're looking at competing competitive program with a lot of strong applications. And sometimes we do have to basically say that the package qualifies, but we're only going to support a smaller level of funding in Phase 2B.
Okay, I'm giving everyone the last 30-second call to unmute yourself and ask your question. If we don't have anything, I'm gonna give it back to Brian.
Just a couple seconds in case anyone wants to jump on here.
Hi, Ben. I've applied for the COVID-19 SBIR proposal, and I was wondering what the current processing time is. I know that it's been expedited, but just wanted to get an idea of that.
Yeah, so I think the average processing time to a recommendation, which means till the program director kind of has their process completed, 6 to 8 weeks is still what we're on track for. Since we've only been running that process like less than 8 weeks, obviously there's not a lot of data around that yet, but we are hoping that you'll hear something within that time period. So again, we have a lot of interest there, and I do think that the opportunity for expedited review is probably fleeting at this point, because the fiscal year is going to wind down and we just have a certain amount of bandwidth that we have. But for things that have been submitted already, 6 to 8 weeks is our goal for the recommendation stage. If you're in line to get an award, it takes a little bit longer after the recommendation because there are other steps that are not guaranteed, but that are, if you're recommended, that's a good sign. But it could take another month based on the last few steps of the process to get the award in place.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, thanks, Ben. It's been really helpful. I think your insights will help people step up their game with proposals, but also maybe think about commercialization in general. So we appreciate you joining us today. Before I say goodbye, I want to remind people that are in our audience that CTC is a state resource to help you navigate the SBIR and STTR funding process. So we offer one-on-one counseling, microgrants to aid in the proposal writing process, pre-submission reviews, lean startup programming to help you get your innovative ideas to market. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks again, Ben, and thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon on the next Quick Chat.